And now I'd like to start things off by introducing our moderator for this evening. Evette Davis is a Litquake board member and the author most recently of The Campaign, the, quote, steamy final installment in the Council Trilogy. Please join me in welcoming Evette Davis and the rest of our panelists.
Hello, everybody. Good evening. How are you doing? All right. Thank you for that introduction, Nora. I'm up here on stage this evening with Charlie Jane Anders and Caitlin Starling. We are going to dive into some witchy discussions about magic and its role in the latest works by these accomplished queer authors. I thought because we're down to two, we might have the luxury of starting by having each of them introduce themselves a little bit more and give a quick overview of their latest books. And how about we start with you, Charlie Jane, and we'll go down the line.
Yeah, hi, I'm Charlie Jane Anders, local writer. I organize a local reading series called Writers with Drinks, which used to be monthly and is now occasional. I also organize a monthly event here in San Francisco called the Trans Nerd Meetup, which is first Saturday of every month till all the trans nerds in your life, or pretty much anybody who is trans and likes to geek out about stuff. You know, it's not very, we don't gatekeep. My new book is Lessons in Magic and Disaster. And it is about a young witch named Jamie. It's kind of about a queer family, actually. Jamie is a trans woman. She's a PhD student. She's a witch. And she's studying English literature of the 18th century for her dissertation, which turns out to also be kind of witchy. Her mom, Serena, is a lesbian. She's about 60 years old. And she's suffering a lot of grief and trauma from like the death of her wife several years ago and some other really bad stuff that happened. And Jamie basically wants to bring her mother back to the world and help her out of her depression by teaching her how to do magic. And she thinks that, you know, teaching her mom how to do magic will kind of empower her and give her purpose again and help her to kind of reconnect with desire, because you have to kind of have a clear desire in order to cast spells. And Jamie doesn't really understand her mother, basically, is kind of what I'll say about that. And that's kind of what this book is about. It's about queer families. It's about queer generational trauma and how queer people, like even if we don't have blood relatives who are queer, there are traumas that are kind of passed down from generation to generation, and there's a struggle that continues from generation to generation. And I mentioned the 18th century literature. There's also like queer characters in the 18th century. I wrote big chunks of a whole 18th century novel that doesn't actually exist. And like, there's queer characters back then who are based on real people, who actually are real people, but I took some liberties with them, who are also struggling with a lot of the same stuff. And it's just kind of about queer resilience in a way, and like how we have to love and accept each other and love ourselves. And that's our real task and our real journey.
Okay, don't say anything more, or I won't have anything to ask you.
Okay, sorry. I got carried away.
So I'm Caitlin Starling. I mostly write horror and speculative fiction. I'm actually based out of Portland, Oregon, and came down for this event. And can I just say, this venue is amazing. It is like the Baroque Gothic little nook of my dreams. I can do all my events here. So I mostly write horror and speculative fiction. My most recent book actually came out on Tuesday. It's The Graceview Patient. It is not super relevant to tonight's discussion because it's contemporary hospital Gothic with no magic in it, just upsetting whiteboards, and PR and Tylenol. And then but earlier this year in May, I had a book come out called The Starving Saints, which is Gothic, or not really, I guess it is kind of Gothic, but is a fantasy horror novel set in a castle under siege, when everyone is on the brink of starvation, when suddenly mysterious divine figures appear with a feast. And don't you want to just sit down and eat this food? Don't ask where the food came from. Aren't you just happy to have something to eat? And it focuses on 3 women in the castle, a apostate nun turned witch, who is questionably sane, but can definitely do magic. A noblewoman turned serving girl who has a huge grudge against a very sad lady knight with searching for someone you'd be loyal to, let's say. And yeah, I'm sure we'll get into things with questions, but it's a really fun, but also much darker, I suspect. But there's a lot of cannibalism. Cannibalism and bees, I would say, are the two main themes in that book.
All right. So after reading all of these books, I came up with a kind of word map: bodies, hunger, appetite, desire, cannibalism, decay, sickness, grief, madness, trauma, claustrophobia, identity, journeys, family. That's almost like reading the New York Times one day.
Seriously, I'm like.
So to dive right in, maybe we'll start with Caitlin and work our way back up. Why witchcraft and sorcery? Why magic? Why do these themes work for telling these kinds of stories?
Well, for my kinds of stories, they're fun because they introduce the unpredictable and the ineffable. And I really like writing magic that is non-standardized. I've done it in a couple different pieces of work. I've tried to approach magic from different directions, but it all come to the same thing of magic is something beyond normal experience, is beyond normal logic, is beyond normal control or influence over our environment. And in the Starving Saints in particular, it is really off the wall, almost like free association style. Phosine, the witch in the tower, is doing things that involve singing, that involve instinct. One of her early scenes, she's been tasked to conjure food from nothing because they have nothing, or almost nothing, and she is like, okay, well, what if I take these grass seeds and I put them inside this piece of rotting meat, and maybe that will remind the meat how to grow instead of decay, which kind of makes sense until you realize she's got a bunch of rotting meat on her work table, and that's not edible. Except that sometimes that particular experiment doesn't work, but working along those lines, she has done things like purify water using rat feces. Things that if people understood how she was doing it, they would not accept what she has done. And there's a big tension of that with her and the presence of the church, which is not it's a fantasy religion church, a Church of the Divine Lady, or the Constant Lady, sorry. The Constant Lady, they like chemistry, they like physics, they like orderly, definable, calculatable steps to get results. And Phosine's sort of wild, intuitive magic is not only nonsensical, it's deeply threatening.
Wow, I love that.
Magic?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, fantasy is so huge right now. Like, when you look at, like, what people are reading, fantasy is just, like, it's everywhere. And I think part of that is because fantasy is kind of a way to think about, like, how we find ourselves, like, identity, and how we claim our power, and how people who are kind of maybe not allowed to be powerful in other ways can claim a kind of power. And it does come back to desire, like we were talking about. Like I said that, Jamie, like a lot of stories about magic, you have to have a very clear intent in order to cast a spell. And, you have to kind of know what you really, really want, to, like the Spice Girls say, in order to cast a successful spell. And so that was the thing I really fixated on at first, because, I started writing Lessons in Magic and Disaster during the pandemic, during 2020, when we were all kind of cooped up and unable to, like, claim anything for ourselves. And so that frustration, I think, was kind of the seed of it, maybe, in a way, and also that trauma and that grief and everything. But I feel like that thing of, like, knowing what you want, like, if you don't know what you want, can you even know who you are? And can you even know, like, what you're about? And, and I feel like part of what happens when you are being, crushed by outside forces, the way definitely the mom in my story is, Serena, you lose sight of who you are, you lose sight of what you want, and you kind of lose yourself. And so there's a kind of alchemy in trying to get yourself back through reclaiming desire, but it has to go through forgiveness and healing and all that stuff. So I think magic is just such a versatile metaphor for identity and selfhood and all that stuff.
There's in my the other main book I've written that deals with magic, The Death of Jane Lawrence. That magic was kind of inspired by like real world chaos magic practices, which sound reductive because it's just, okay, you just know the world to be other than it is. And I had to dig deep into like how to put tension behind that, and B, how to make it believable. And it's that sometimes, you know, I had this in my head and of course it all fell apart, but knowing is a different, I decided in the book at least that knowing is a different thing than believing. Believing is wanting something to be true, knowing is knowing something to be true without being a question. It's just a fact of the universe. And I feel like that kind of touches on the same sort of thing of it's not really enough to be like, okay, I can put a name on the thing I want. You have to experience the thing that you want. You have to be open to experiencing the thing that you want.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I think it's faith a little.
Yeah.
I think it's faith. I want to build a little on what you were just talking about with Serena, the mom. What I really came away with thinking about, and it's interesting to say you wrote it during the pandemic because it felt very contemporary to me, the damaging effects of cancel culture and the punishing behavior that's displayed towards her, this gotcha character assassination, something that really happens all the time in our news cycle now. Was that intentional? Were you thinking about that? And it seems so much more relevant today, but has anybody else asked you about that? And what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of the phrase cancel culture, to be honest, because I feel like it's a super loaded. But I love the question, and
use whatever phrase you like.
Apologize for nitpicking.
No.
I mean, what happens with Serena? Her backstory, which we find out pretty quickly in the novel, is that she was targeted by some right-wing, basically scammers who tried to trick her into saying stuff that they could twist into seeming really bad. And there's just, she was kind of slimed by this right-wing media infrastructure that is now doing that all the time. And she lost her job right at this moment when her wife was dying and a bunch of other stuff was happening. And so it really like wrecked her, and she wants to fight back against these right-wing agitators who kind of went after her. And she wants to use magic to do it, and that's kind of a little bit of a spoiler, but not a lot of a spoiler. It's just, I feel like when I started to think about Serena's character and her past as like a lesbian activist, and I wrote all this stuff of her like doing lesbian activism in the 90s with the Lesbian Avengers. I was a member of the Lesbian Avengers for like a year or two back in the early 2000s. The Lesbian Avengers and like all this stuff and like forming like a lesbian family and like just fighting all these battles against prejudice and oppression. And then she gets kind of tripped up by these, conservative, they just want to destroy people. And, that felt very real to me. It just sort of felt, it felt instantly right for that to be one of the things that she's dealing with. And it kind of comes back to that thing I talked about before about reclaiming your identity, reclaiming your personhood. I feel like part of why the notion of queer magic in particular is so potent is because as queers we have had to fight so hard just to see ourselves, just to exist in a world that denies us over and over again, and that tries to misinterpret us and tries to like just accuse us of all kinds of awful stuff. And when I went back and looked at what people were saying about lesbians in the 90s, it was the exact same stuff they're saying about trans people today, exactly the same stuff. Can lesbians be good moms? Can they have kids? Are they gonna, mess up their children? It was like all this same stuff. And I feel like the existence of queer people is a kind of spell in a way. It really is. We exist through an act of faith, an act of we conjure ourselves into being out of whatever scraps we can find. And then we just are resplendent. And it's just, I don't know. I've been in the queer literary world for so long, and I've just been amazed by what people have been able to do with so little. So that was kind of a rambling answer.
No, it's
yeah.
And I have a similar question for you, Caitlin. I at times when I was reading your book about being under siege in a castle, I wondered somehow if this was like a metaphor for the trans and queer community. I mean, it has a contemporary feel. Maybe it's just because I'm living in this time right now where I'm a straight woman, but I feel like the whole world is under siege by these people. But so everything I looked at somehow came back to that. But was there an intention in any of that? Can you talk a little bit about why a castle, under siege? Like, where did that come from?
So it was primarily like an aesthetics thing and a scenario thing, right? I like to write books where usually a very small cast, sometimes one person. In this case, there's a whole bunch of people in this castle, but I like locking people in one setting where they have to deal with various challenges within that setting, and the meaning of the setting changes throughout the book. And a castle was just a very evocative symbol of that. Historically, castles are there for when you need to retreat and you need to wait out the enemy. And you're supposed to have enough food, you're supposed to know how many people the castle can support. In this case, the castle has way more people than they're supposed to be in that castle, partially because the king is in residence, happen to be passing through. And also, people are supposed to come help you once you're under siege. Like, the king is in this castle under siege. His army should be coming to get him. The army has not arrived. This is 6 months in, no help is coming, and things like that. I will say, I did write this also in 2020, the first draft. So, there might be a little bit of that in there subconsciously, for sure.
Under siege.
Yeah, when I was living in a tower apartment in Chicago, and had not left in many months. So it wasn't meant to be metaphorical, but it definitely has the bones to be, and for mostly though, it was just because it was a fun setting, and then I could make really terrible things happen, including one of Trela is the serving girl with a knife and a dream, and she is the one character in the book with the opportunity to leave, and her choice of whether she goes or stays forms like a major pivot point for her character and for the plot.
Sure. Well, you bring up a question that was on my mind about the serving girl with the knife, and that is magic, horror. All of these genres have breaking points. You can go only so far before you lose people. Like in my books, vampires can actually be out in daylight. They drink. And some people probably think that's terrible. So my question is, how far can you go, and do you know, right? Do you know how far you can take magic or horror, and before you've crossed the line, do you not care, or is it a conscious decision when you're writing about how far you can take writers before maybe they fall off the cliff and don't go with you? Well, what do you think about that?
I don't think about my readers possibly as much as I should, or at least not in like a very present sense. I have sort of at this point, I have written enough for people to read, whether that has been for published work, or I started writing, or I got a lot of my writing practice in doing online role playing and writing fan fiction. And those are both audience-focused forms of writing, very, very immediately audience-focused forms of writing, especially if you're posting fanfic serially and not once you've edited the whole thing. And I realized I had learned, especially from role-playing, to write even a couple paragraphs at a time to get a particular reaction out of the person who I knew was across from me. So I have some of that in my head. In terms of, I always worry that I actually don't go far enough. And I think that's because of writing in the horror genre. I was a teenager when Saw came out, and so that set my bar, that's what my brain thought all horror was, and so I'm clearly not that extreme, so am I actually writing horror? So every time I write a book, I'm like, okay, is this really going that far? Then I get feedback of okay, this scene was absolutely disgusting, why did you do that? Which is great, I'm doing my job, fantastic. In terms of Starving Saints in particular, and most of my writing, I mostly am focused on feeling like I've earned character progression and choices by what I've already written. So whether that's a character making a really controversial choice or a difficult choice, or even a choice that is an aesthetic that I really like and I want it to be in the book, have I actually built up the book enough for that moment to feel integrated into the rest of the book? I think that is, unless, sometimes you really want something to be very jarring, especially in horror, you want something to come completely out of left field. There's a bit later, in like the last third of Starving Saints, where suddenly a character is not there, that you're like, wait a minute, what's going to happen now that that character's gone? I won't say more without spoil because that would be a huge spoiler. But generally speaking, there needs to be some. It's a very synesthetic thing for me. I need to feel like there's enough of a build up to something, if not a direct build up, then an emotional, structural build up.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I love what you said before about like how you worry about justifying the character choices and progressions, and like that you've done enough. And thank God for the revision process, because that is where the rubber hits the road in terms of like, okay, this person does this thing on page 200, the first 199 pages need to back that up. If we're going to keep that in there, that's always a fun ride. I mean, I've had books where I definitely went too far and had to pull back. All the Birds in the Sky, like earlier drafts of that book, were just wild, with just like the magic and the weird science just going way out of control, like in ways that made it hard to follow the story, maybe. But I mean, it really depends on the story. Like magic is like anything else. Magic, any kind of plot device is like anything else. It's how you use it and what you're trying to do with it, and how it's serving the story. And like if it's not serving the story, if the story is serving it, then maybe you have a problem. I feel like with Lessons in Magic and Disaster, I'd written a bunch of books in a row that were big high concept, like magic or like space or whatever, like big ideas, big plot devices. And this one, I just wanted to do something that was like really, like most of what happens in that book is just like little intimate moments that are like exploring what it is to be a family, and like just stuff like your partner brings home a bag of sex toys, and like your first thought is there something wrong with our relationship? Is my partner trying to fix something in our relationship instead of being excited? Just like moments like that, little moments. And like, I feel like some of my favorite moments in that book are just like the funny, silly BDSM scenes and the funny, silly moments of like queer joy. There's a lot of that. And I just, the magic is there to kind of explore something about the characters that I want to get at. And it's sort of, over the course of the book, it gets bigger, but it never becomes kind of the main event, I think.
There's, this is on my mind just because I read like 70% of the book today, but I'm currently reading The Works of Vermin by Hiram Ennis, which is fantastic and is weird. The world building is in-depth and weird and alien in ways that make the plot go in different directions than they would in a more like Starving Saints is a fictional world, but it's close enough to European medieval history that you have some touch points to orient yourself that I don't need to take the time to ground you. And Hiram did this amazing thing of, I think it's the confidence that they have writing this world and knowing the depth that you're like, okay, I'll trust you. I will see where you're taking this, and I trust that it will all come together, and it does. And that's like the extreme side of things where, they could an editor could easily have said, Hiram, I think you're going to lose your audience. And luckily, Carla Laird at Tor did not say that to them.
Yeah.
But it's this great sort of like, the great magic trick of good writing is that the confidence of the writer is invisible, but it's always there, supporting the reader.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, queer horror is having such a huge moment right now, and a lot of it is freaking super weird. I think yesterday I published I do a book review roundup, and I did a book review roundup that was mostly queer horror, and God, there's some weird stuff right now. And it's just like, and it's just glorious. And like a lot of it is just like super, super messed up and super intense, and just like, holy cow. It's just, we're so lucky to have all this stuff right now.
Yeah. So ironically, I actually had COVID when I read your book.
Oh, okay.
I was like,
we're
still doing this? I've had it so many times now, I don't care. But for me, the way that magic moves between you and between the character and their mom, the way it gets out of hand, the struggle for them to find each other and to love each other. I was like, at some points I was kind of weepy. I was really moved by it. And I think I told you, I think it's because my mom died during the pandemic, and I miss her. I have a picture of her on my altar where I talk to her every day. But would you talk a little bit about chosen family and that theme in your book, and why it's such a strong thing, both your family that you have and the family you choose? And I don't know, I was very touched by the grace of that in your novel. So thoughts?
Yeah, thank you so much. I love that so much. And like, it is very much a book about like biological family and chosen family, and in this case, both biological family and chosen family are queer, which is something that I haven't actually. My mom is, as far as I know, not queer. She's waited a long time to come out. If she's gonna come out, she better do it soon. That came out late, I'm sorry. I mean, to my knowledge, I don't have any queer biological family members. But yeah, I mean, it's yeah, I feel like the thing of just like part of what was so joyful about that book to write, because I mean, my father died during the pandemic. I lost a lot of people, you know. That was part of what I was kind of working through as I wrote this book. But it is there, like, I just want to return to saying that there's a lot of queer joy in it. A lot of the queer joy is about people finding each other and people, you know, building something together and being intentional about it. Like, I feel like there's a lot of scenes in this book where people are being super intentional about not just having a relationship, but like how this relationship is going to be, and like being aware of the power dynamics. And that's part of why I felt like one of the things that I was like, not nervous, but like just curious to see how this was going to play with people is that, you know, Jamie, the main character, the daughter, is in a BDSM relationship with her partner, and Serena, the mom, her wife, was a sex worker, and I feel like they are steeped in this idea of negotiation and consent and being aware of power dynamics. And there are ways in which people are not aware of power dynamics at the start of the book, and they become aware of power dynamics over the course of the book. And that was something that I thought a lot about. And I feel like I don't just want to see people fall in love or form families or, you know, find each other. I want to see them really, lack of a better term, negotiate. I want to see them actually work out how we're going to be good to each other, who we're going to be to each other, what kind of family we're going to have. And that sounds like that could be very, like, you know, noodly and legalistic, but it's actually very sweet and tender. And it's sweet and tender in real life. Like, I feel like I've had processing conversations in my life that are better than like any hug. And that sounds weird, but it's true.
Mm-hmm. I've been married for 30 years, and I can tell you, I think negotiation is a big part of a good relationship.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah.
So we're gonna. I know that your first book is not, or your newest book is not included, but I was fascinated by it, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the body as a site of conflict, and and what the heck is that all about?
Yeah. So, quick orienting summary. The Graceview Patient is a contemporary, I'm calling it a hospital Gothic, in the sense that it has like a Gothic structure, and I was very intentionally making the hospital like a Gothic manor on the hill sort of situation. But it's contemporary. It's actually, one of the main characters, Isabel, is a nurse who worked in the ICU during like 2020, 2021, and has some burnout and some emotions about caretaking and about duty of care left over from that. But the main character, Margaret, or Meg, is chronically ill. She has a rare fictional autoimmune condition. She has, as a last-ditch effort, agreed to take part in an experimental paid medical trial. That the terms are basically, she puts herself into the care of this program in the hospital for a month or two, and they very dramatically destroy and rebuild her immune system. And in the process, as she's going through this, the main plot arc is about, you know, are the things that she's perceiving in the hospital, are the strange visions she's having, or the sightings of a prior program participant, are they real? Are they a haunting? Are they something lurking in the hospital? Or are they medication side effects? But the undercurrent is basically, what is it to be taken care of, and what is it to be a patient? When I set out to write the book, I specifically didn't want to write like a wahaha evil Dr. Genius. Like, medicine has its paternalistic, very dangerous moments in history and now, for sure. But I didn't want this to be one of those stories. By and large, the people at the hospital that Meg is at are just doing their job. Like, they are just like showing up for their shift and trying to deal with their patients. And Meg is caught between these two extremes of, on the one hand, we all have this narrative of active fighting and active striving. And on the other hand, in a lot of ways, she needs to be patient and passive, right? She needs to accept that this is gonna suck and work with her care team to endure, as opposed to go out and fight the monster. But she's perceiving a monster in the hospital. So it goes back and forth between that. But a lot of the book, it's all from her perspective. It's from actually, there's a slight frame story where she's trying to tell herself what happened to her because she knows that her memories are unreliable, and she's trying to put together a coherent narrative based on her memories, based on the evidence of her body. And yeah, do you have a specific little nugget you want me to tease out? Or
I was just curious if you're reminding me more and more of like a mad scientist who has like a glass case and you're sort of playing around with your characters. But I just wondered about the body. You know, there's a history of sanatorum kind of ha 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 on the hill sorts of story, but the autoimmune illness, the memory, I don't know. I wonder if there was something intentional there you were trying to talk about.
A lot of it, I think, is just about the vulnerability and malleability of our bodies. Like, at some point, we are all going to be disabled for some length of time. It's going to happen. We have bodies. They change over time. They have different needs over time. I have psoriasis, which is technically an autoimmune condition that can get pretty gnarly if you get psoriatic arthritis and stuff like that. Mine's mild, but needs a fancy biologic injection. My mom had HIV, and adding to the dead parents theme of tonight, she died when I was 9. But I went with her to a lot of her clinic appointments, stuff like that. This was in the 90s. I didn't understand at the time, but since then I have actually talked with her main nurse from Cleveland Clinic, who was helping run the medication trial program she was in. Just a lot of it, I was really trying to dig into this, and all my books have at least a little bit to do with perception of self, perception of reality, memory, how all of that is not as static or as objective as we'd like. I have a really hard time with anything that claims to be like correct because there are always so many facets to so many things. But in Grace Be Patient in particular, there's a scene where she goes, am I the me that's talking right now, or am I the body that's in the bed? Like, which is actually me? Because they're not matching right now. And to me, that was a really interesting and thorny thing to explore because, I've written books where memory, it's okay, am I the person who existed up until the point where I lost my memories, or am I the person who is going forward now? And do people have different expectations of me based on when they met me? The book also has to do with people's expectations of disability and like, oh, you're not better yet? When are you going to get better?
Right.
And also like, the toll that takes on a person and how it can make you withdraw because it's just not worth it. It's too hard, it's too painful to reach out over and over again and just get met with people who don't quite understand.
You're giving me a good segue. I'm going to ask you two to indulge me a little. So in honor of Jack Hirschman, our North Beach poet, in reading these stories, it reminded me of one of his poems. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm going to read a little, and there's a question in it. Go to your broken heart. If you think you don't have one, get one. To get one, be sincere. Learn sincerity of intent by letting life enter because you're helpless, really, to do otherwise. Even as you try escaping, let it take you and tear you open, like a letter sent, like a sentence inside. You've waited all your life, though you've committed nothing. Let it send you up. Let it break you, heart. Why is heartbreak a good source for storytelling? You go first.
Wow, I mean, gosh, I love that poem, first of all. Gosh, I miss Jack Hirschman. Yeah, I used to see them around all the time. Heartbreak. I mean, I feel like I always hear authors talk about torturing their characters, and I'm always like, oh, come on. Like, I don't want to torture my characters. I want to, like, force them to make interesting choices. I want to force them to question themselves and to, like, realize that they don't know as much as they thought they did. And I want to push them to their limits, maybe. That's maybe torturing them a little bit. I don't know. I guess I used to talk about torturing my characters, and then I got sick of that framing. But I feel like I like it. I feel like, first of all, life is full of heartbreak. And it's unavoidable. It is literally unavoidable. Like, no matter what you do, even if you try to just never care about anyone or anything, you will be heartbroken at some point. And one of the reasons why stories are so powerful is that they help us to deal with that. They help us to heal. And I feel like what I always say about my work, at least what I say a lot lately, is that I write stories about people who learn to see each other more clearly, people who don't see each other clearly at the start, and then over the course of a story they learn to see each other more clearly. And I feel like part of that, how that happens, is that you get your heart broken, and you lose stuff. You lose pieces of yourself, you lose pieces of your life, and you lose people who are important to you. And through that you learn something, and you learn it the hard way, because human beings, that's the only way we seem to learn anything, is the hard way. So, I mean, I guess, yeah, I feel like you also, I'm going to start quoting Frankie Beverly and Mays, but joy and pain, you can't, you have to have them both. Like, the joy doesn't mean anything if there's no pain,
Well said.
Yeah, I'm just reflecting on the fact that I think, loving anybody means eventually at some point you're going to accidentally or intentionally break their heart, or you're going to hurt them in some way. You're going to let them down, and letting yourself see the damage you've done is terrifying, right? And just on small scales too, of just finding out that something you didn't think about has caused harm somehow, has made your partner's life harder, has made a parent or a child's life harder. It sucks, and sometimes you have a very good reason for what you did, and you just, yeah. I also like to see it as putting my characters under strain and seeing what they do when, especially in horror, basically, when everything else is lost, right? Horror really, really pushes people into hard decisions, into terrifying situations. I was asked recently why I wrote horror, particularly given that the world is terrifying enough. And my answer was, and it's a little bit roundabout, but I also was asked recently by my partner why I listen to upsetting historical podcasts. In particular, I was updating him on details about thalidomide that I had just learned. And like, I had known the broad details, but I learned some new stuff from a podcast I was listening to, and he was like, why do you do this with your spare time? Like, why is this what you do? And I was like, well, on some level, there's a little bit of, there's a little bit of an entertainment aspect to it. Like, I won't deny that I don't listen to true crime much anymore, but I used to, because there's a thrill that comes with it of hearing dark things and putting yourself in that mindset. But a lot of it is that I've always been aware of stuff like that in the world, and to shut myself off from it feels like intentionally looking away. Not in like a, bear witness to it sort of thing, but just a closing off of human experience and a closing off of the variety of things that life can bring you and that life has brought people in the past. But it's also heartbreaking to not look away from that sort of thing, which is roundabout to a point where I don't even know where I'm at answering your question, but it's what came to mind when you asked it.
Yeah, I mean, like I said before, horror is having a moment, and it is because the world is fucking terrifying, and we are being, we're all kind of being tortured right now in a way.
Yeah, we are.
And
I think horror can bring like a
catharsis.
Catharsis and it's not dignity to suffering. That's a stupid way to put it.
You get to survive. You
get to look at the person. You get to see the person going through the terrible thing and not look away from it. Like just like with writing Graceview Patient, part of it was, and I bring this up in the book, that if you look up like recommendations of what to bring with you for a long hospital stay. The assumptions of the list writers, or the AI that was used to generate the list, are either that you are an expectant pregnant person, or that you are the caretaker of somebody with cancer. And I'm sure there are lists out there written by cancer patients for cancer patients. I'm sure they are there, but they are not what comes up first. And there's an element of writing the Grace View patient of I wanted to write about what it's like to be in the bed, because so much is focused on caretaking, so much is focused on caretakers of lots of people with disabilities, and it's being hospitalized is really hard. Being hospitalized is always a race kind of between, even in a perfect scenario, fixing you fast enough that being in the hospital doesn't take too much of a toll on you.
Right.
There is no way to be in a hospital that is sunshine and flowers.
Right. My mom used to always say, "Don't put me in the hospital, kill me." All right, well,
That was a cheerful.
so we actually need to take a break. This was fascinating.
Yeah, I'm leaving you on a really high note.
Enjoy the conversation. You're welcome. If you haven't, I encourage you to go and buy a book during our intermission, because I think we'll be signing books at the end of the program. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you in 20 minutes.
I'll also hang out if you want to get your book signed during the intermission. That's totally fine.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
That means they stayed up late.
Yeah, I love that Jack Freshman poem. Oh my god. He was
thank you to everybody for sticking it out. And what you don't know is that this is basically like a wall of bright light for us. It's like being on stage. I'm just gonna, in honor of Ace Frehley dying today, we're gonna, there we go. So
really died.
I feel like I need to paint my face and sing a misogynist song. So, you know Beth? We could sing Beth. But, all right, this is where we take questions from the audience. And so I think,
Yes?
was that wait for me?
No, are we allowed to ask questions? Is that
Well, so are people supposed to come up to the mic, or are we just going to do shout out? Does anyone want to give me some direction here? Okay, we're just going to take shout outs. Let's do it.
for the starving saints, for the two shadow fiery creatures,
Yeah.
are they mini dragons? What did you picture them? What does your mind conjure them to look like?
So in the Starving Saints, there are two little guys named Nail and Arnuo who live in Fosine's tower that she accidentally summoned at some point and is not sure what they are. And they are officially, they are salamanders of the mythological sort. So they are in fact kind of like little mini toothless dragons, toothless owl dragons, but they've got wings, and they've got scales, and they have wool that comes out from their scales. And that's like the one hint that they're salamanders, is that they have random bits of wool on them, which that was an alleged alchemical component. In reality, they are modeled after my cats, just smarter, which is a problem.
What are the cats' names?
My cats are named Mercutio and Mephistopheles.
Oh my god.
Because they're tabby cats have an M name. That's the rule in our house.
Okay, yes.
First of all, thank all three of you so much. This is like such a, like, brain's firing off, my heart's firing off. I'm so appreciative. But speaking of the pandemic, Charlie Jane, I read All the Birds in the Sky in 2020. I read a lot of books in 2020, and that was the one that I was like recommending to everyone because it just really like buoyed my soul in a way that was so important during that really dark time, right? And one of the things that I so appreciated about that book was the way that the severity and the starkness of reality and this kind of hopeful alternative were both present. Like, it was not escapist in the looking away from reality kind of sense, but it was offering another reality too. And I guess my question is, what do you think is the role, and anybody really, but why is it important to be writing about magic right now in this moment that we're living in?
Did everybody hear that? The question is, why is it important to write about magic right now?
Yeah, I mean, so, gosh, I wrote All the Birds in the Sky a while ago, so it's not as fresh in my mind, but I feel like, you know, part of what was so fun about working on that book was that it was a way to think about real problems like climate change and like the tendency to kind of just double down on our mistakes and to just be like, this time we'll fix it. Like, which is so much a part of the way that we get ourselves into these situations. The thing that really surprised me about that book in particular that I didn't see coming as I was writing it, which I feel like this happens in a lot of my books, it also happens in Lessons in Magic and Disaster, is that the role of connection and community and people kind of really, you know, learning to understand. That's something like people learning to understand each other is like part of how we survive the disasters in that book, more than like doing excellent magic or doing excellent science or whatever. It's just really about, you know, the stuff with the caddies. The caddies are these devices that people carry around that like basically enable you to get to know the people in your life better and to like make better friendships and make better connections with people. And, you know, I feel like that's where I get optimistic. That's where I get a lot of my hope from. When magic makes me feel buoyed and excited and hopeful about the world is when I think of it as like drawing these bonds between people tighter and making people more connected to each other. And I feel like also, somebody was talking about this the other day, I feel like a lot of tech now is designed to not bring us together. It's designed to keep us, you know, not even to keep us in our own kind of like whatever, our own like bubbles or whatever, but to keep us sitting alone at home, scrolling, never leaving the house, like even though now we can leave the house. You know, a lot of tech just, it's designed to just capture your eyeballs for as much time as possible, which is time that you don't spend with other people. And so part of the fantasy of that book was, what if the opposite, kind of? And like, so there's tech that brings people together. There's also magic that is about connection with other people. And so I think I was desperately craving something that actually does the opposite of what a lot of our most valued, you know, devices do now.
And I'm thinking about magic in my own work, and I'm realizing that sort of, this is mildly spoilery, I guess, but where magic starts to become a problem for my characters is when they get isolated. And they have unlimited power to make the world fit what they think would be right and would be best, and how quickly that unravels and backfires. And so, you know, magic in that sense of the limits of solo wish fulfillment, basically, even if you think you know better than everybody, especially if you think you know better than everybody. And yeah, I'm not sure why I think that's relevant for all times, but I bet that's why it's coming out of my books like that.
I'm just going to take a moment to answer that question too, because I just had a novel that came out a couple weeks ago, which is the end of a trilogy about a secret society of witches and vampires that intervene in politics to save humanity from fascism, and it stars a witch from San Francisco who tries to elect a woman president and save the universe from being taken over by forces of evil. So I think magic also, I wish it was true, but I think magic also is a way to be hopeful, because it gives you the ability to bend time and to bend the rules, and sometimes that is very satisfying.
It can be really satisfying to see someone be able to make the world take note of their power and their perspective. Like, the world has to respond to magic,
That's right.
basically.
And
that can be very cathartic.
And in magical books, people who don't have agency get agency, which is sometimes nice. So.
That's
Alright.
a much clearer way of saying what I was trying to say.
Thank you. We had a question over here. Now we can go to this side of the room. Anybody want to ask a question? Anyone? Please.
Hey, we read your book. We're Femmes and Nuns book club. The Starving.
You read The Starving Saints?
Yeah.
Good job.
I have a spoiler question, so if you haven't read it and you want to read it, just don't listen.
Plug your ears. Okay.
Are they in a couple at the end, or what is that?
In my heart, yes. As in, but I did get a question from my agent, which was, she's like, I love this, I love it, but is it an OT3 situation, or is it a Sir Voight has two hands situation? Which is how you know my agent's fantastic. But yes, I think it's going to be challenging though for them to keep that going.
Yeah. Sleep it, thanks.
Okay.
You get the best questions.
Stop loving now.
Yes. All right. You can unplug your ears now. I'm moving back over here. Anyone have a question here on this side? Yes, in the back, please. You're going to have to project.
Sure. Very broad question. Guess I'm curious hearing about the writing experience personally and how it cannot be an isolating experience, or how you feel about your own personal writing experience. And then also the process of going from it being a passion or a hobby to more of a career that maybe feels successful or sustainable. So.
Charlie Day, would you like to start?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge believer in like the writing process as kind of like a thing that helps to keep you sane. I wrote a book that came out a few years ago called Never Say You Can't Survive, that's about how to use creative writing to get through some really hard times. And unfortunately, I sort of thought it was only going to be relevant for a short time, but it's remained relevant. But I feel like I am really passionate about like finding ways to make writing communal, like finding writing groups, finding like having writing dates with my friends, just talking about what I'm working on with people in my life, just like having, like reading my work to people at an open mic or at a reading or whatever, like just reading out what I'm working on. It's reading out work in progress actually has been really good for me in terms of like fine tuning it. But you know, I feel like just anything you can do to make it less isolating. But also when you're writing, you're never really alone because your characters are there and there are these like imaginary people who are driving you completely up the wall with their weird antics. But yeah, in terms of like making it into a career, I mean, you know, yeah, it changes things when it's your job and you have to, instead of just having fun messing around, you're creating a product that you're eventually going to have to sit in front of a bunch of people and sell to them. And you know, that changes things. I feel like the writing part hasn't changed for me. I still love it. I still feel the same, just like joy from getting to create something brand new. And I just, you know, the main thing is just remembering to enjoy that part and to connect to that part, even when some of the other parts are just completely like wrecking my nerves.
Yeah, definitely. Publishing is one thing, writing is another, and the more you can keep them separate, the better. But it's tricky. So just to illustrate, Starving Saints and The Grace of Patient both came out this year. They were not written at the same time. The Starving Saints was written in 2020, and then my publisher, the one who went on to publish The Grace of Patient, went, well, that book's a little bit too weird. Can you write us a different one? And did that for several times until we finally were like, well, it sounds like we can find a different publisher, and it's not going to compete with the audience. Publishing fun stuff. Anyway, Starving Saints found a home. And several years after I wrote it. I wrote Starving Saints in 2020 with the most unhinged writing process I have ever utilized because I was terrified of it. I had The Luminous Dead, my debut novel, was already out. The Death of Jane Lawrence was sold, and it had edited it. It was coming out the following year. And I didn't have a contract going forward for anything. And both of those two books, I had to substantially rewrite. So my agent and I went, well, I write very quickly. How about I just write a whole first draft, and then we'll see what I have to change, because I always have to change something. So I sat down to write it, not knowing where it would go, not knowing it wasn't going to find a home for several years. And I had never written a book with as large of a cast, which is very funny to a lot of people because it's not a large cast compared to most people's books. And I had never written like full secondary world fantasy, and I hadn't done all these things. I was so intimidated. I wrote the book out of order, sometimes on the sentence level. I had an open document, and I would get an idea for a sentence somewhere in the scene, write it, and then pop up to another place and write another paragraph, and then slowly stitch it together. As a way to get around my anxiety. And then weirdly, by the end, it was A, good, and B, didn't need to be rewritten. So apparently I had learned how to write books in the meantime. But it was isolating, because it was a very isolated writing experience because it was 2020. I had 2 people that I was sharing it with as I kept writing. Cut to Grace View Patient. I had pitched to my publisher on an outline. They had already bought it and another book. And I had a toddler, and I just, as quickly as I could, sat down and wrote the thing like in a matter of weeks just to get it done with. Because it was a contractual obligation, it was work. And it still turned out, it still has magic in it. There were still moments of the book where it became alive to me as I was writing it, but it was a very different kind of stress to be writing it. But it also had a place to go. I knew where it was going, which is both some ways very freeing and some ways very intimidating. But also still very isolated. I'm realizing as I'm like, while you were talking, like I actually need to work on finding places for connection. Back when I was learning how to write, when I did all of my time in the word mines, before I ever thought about getting published. Because I had decided, back in college, there was no chance I was ever going to be professionally published. Like the odds were so slim, it wasn't worth pursuing. So I just did fan fiction and roleplay, and it was fine. That was deeply connected with other people. That was for and with other people. And I have my readers, my early readers who I send things to as I write to kind of keep that alive, but it's not the same as having like a community. And I think that's something I actually need to work on.
Yeah, I will say actually that my publishing contracts, I always try to get like the longest, vaguest deadlines for my stuff, and like just because like that thing of writing a book on deadline, I know people who always are just like their contracts or the way they've worked it out is like this book is due in 3 months and I'm just gonna write it in 3 months, and like I'm like, the book's gonna be done when it's done, and you're gonna get it when you get it. And like Lessons in Magic and Disaster, my publisher didn't know I was working on it. I was supposed to be writing a different thing for them, and I just kind of cheated on it and worked on Lessons in Magic and Disaster part of the time. And I was just like, how long can I keep anybody from knowing this book exists? Kind of, because I didn't want that outside pressure of like, where's the book, kind of.
I almost wish I had done that. Instead I did the opposite, where I had Grace View Patient was a 2-book contract, and the book after it was going to be this Cabin in the Mountains book that I have fully outlined. I will probably write it someday. But then I had this other idea, and I just shot my editor an email going, okay, hear me out. Breastfeeding vampires, is this anything?
Ooh.
And he went, can we get on a call? But here's the call, he was all on board, and all I had to do was write him again like a little synopsis-y outline, just so that he knew there was like a book-shaped thing, and then he let me go at it. But I then had to turn it in the time frame of the original contract, which worked out fine, but I'm now waiting on copy edits for it. It'll come out next year, it's fine.
Ooh.
It's called Milk Teeth.
Great title.
Side note, my editor tried to change that title,
No.
and I would like you to hear his suggestion, and I want to see what they're actually pulled through.
Okay.
He wanted to title it The Suckling. Thank you. Yeah, my response was basically, I almost just like recorded booing and said, there's no pig in this. Like, I think if you're going to call a book The Suckling, there needs to be like a pig. But, yeah. Anyway, don't worry, his boss overruled him too and was like, Milk Teeth is a great title. I don't know what. Yeah. So you have that to look forward to.
Wow.
That's awesome, I can't wait for that.
Yeah, I think you had the better title. All right, we have time for one more question. Here, please.
Okay, so my question is about balancing the research rabbit hole and getting your shit done.
Right. So in the back, in case you didn't hear it, how much research do you do and how much writing do you do? How do you get your shit done when you really just feel like researching your book?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go first. I put off research as much as possible. Like, I will just, if I don't need to know something in order to write a scene, I'll just write the scene, and then I can, if there's details that I need to flesh out, like, you know, the research is going to make the details pop more. That's a revision problem. That's for future me, especially since that scene might end up getting cut, and then what's the point of doing all this research? I often will do, like with Lessons in Magic and Disaster, it's a pretty good example. The research happened after I had written most of a first draft, and like, basically, originally my main character is doing her PhD about 18th century literature, and that was just going to be, occasionally we were going to check in on how badly her dissertation was going, and it would just be like, yep, the dissertation is still a trash fire, moving on. But, you know, I got super interested in the 18th century literature piece, and all these women writers of the 18th century that people had just memory hold. That like when I was studying this stuff in college, I was told there were only like 3 men who wrote great books in this period, and nobody else was writing, and nope. There were all these women writers who were doing incredible work, and a lot of them were pretty obviously queer. And so at some point I just basically just completely immersed myself in all of this stuff and read just like 20 books and like just completely like dove into it. And then, you know, there was a point where I needed to add more about 90s lesbian activism, and so I went, that was another research hole, but that was in the revision process, and it's mostly like, that was about like kind of just fleshing out some of the stuff in the book that needed to be fleshed out. But, you know, if I'm in the middle of writing a first draft and I'm just like, I cannot go forward until I know something about this, then I'll stop and research, but I just want to get that first draft done usually.
Yeah, I, generally speaking, I need to already have a base level of knowledge about a thing before I'll build the book around it. So like big scale, important details like how are castles, not so much how are castles laid out, but like how do fairies work, for instance, things like that. I have to have some base amount, so I don't have to research every chapter. Like I'm trying to get that first draft done as quickly as possible. So I need to have like percolated research in the back of my brain that I can just imagine a story using those elements. For Graceview Patient, I don't have any medical training. That book is very much like the minutia of day-to-day nursing in a hospital in a lot of ways. And I have the benefit of Meg also does not have medical training, so she doesn't understand everything that is being done to her, but I wanted it all to be accurate. And luckily, I have an ER nurse friend, former ER nurse, now she's in care coordination. But so she, and she's also a writer, and so I was like, can I hire you to go through and like flag like correct my mistakes and stuff. And not only did she do that, but because she's a writer and because she's fantastic, she gave me a huge general document on hospital culture and things to include to make it feel more like a real hospital. And she was basically, well, there's this one part where she went, hey, the way you've written this book up until now, Isabel is a better nurse than what you have her doing in this chapter. She would not do this. Yeah. However, Meg might mistake something for this. And that added a whole layer of complexity that would not have been there if I had been going just based on what I could Google about like nursing practice and like lurking on our nursing. And I spent a lot of time on medical subreddits. And but I am generally speaking, I'm pretty bad at directed research. I have to kind of come at it from the side of just like, again, absorbing it so that it's in my brain. And I can look up little details, but I know people who will talk about, reading 6 nonfiction books before they start writing a new book, and I don't know. I have to have done that a couple years ago accidentally, and then it'll come out.
And I'll just offer a third perspective, which is that I started my career as a newspaper journalist, so actually I really like research, and I think I probably do more than I need to, and I have amassed a really impressive library of books on poisonous plants, weapons, deadly weapons, tarot cards, and other dangerous objects and other kinds of things, which I think are very useful. And I actually sort of have to slap myself and be like, no, you have to go write your book now. But
I will say when I do direct research, I then have to like work really hard not to just info dump it into the book.
Yeah, the Anne Rice problem.
Yeah, there's speaking of Anne Rice and vampires. Then in the breastfeeding vampire book, I decided that I needed to put in because of our anesthesiology. Something called a pelvic exenteration, which is what they do in advanced cases of cervical cancer and related cancers, where they will just take out a lot of your abdominal organs and replace them with stomas and various other things to allow things to continue functioning in a different manner. And trying to figure out how to have the gynecological oncologist in the book, who is the love interest, bring up what this is and explain it to a vampire who also has no medical training without it feeling like, and now for a segment on pelvic exenteration. It's so hard.
Oh my gosh.
all right, we'll have you back to talk about that. All right, thanks everybody. I just want to say, as a board member for Litquake, I appreciate all of you being here. Nora talked about this a little, but we wouldn't be able to have a festival without an audience, so thank you for joining us, and make sure to tell your friends. Take care.